Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check out the link above to my Patreon page. I'm here today to share some research and development I've been working on for Modern Merfolk's sideboard in this new age of Benthic Biomancer and main deck deprives. One of my greatest frustrations with Modern Merfolk over the past couple of years has been the deck's lack of focus. Do we want to be an aggressive blue-green deck with Lords and Spell Pierce? Or do we want to stay mono-blue? If so, do we want to run Curse Catcher, Mistcaller, Spell Pierce, none of the above? What about Phantasmal Image, Harbinger of the Tides, Master of Waves? Pilots have chosen to run their pet cards in the absence of any real tournament results to help guide our community in a superior direction. This has all changed recently with our shift towards Benthic Biomancer and Deprive. As of this past Friday, February 22nd, Merfolk has had 9 consecutive competitive League 5-0 results, running these two cards. This streak of results has given us a new focus. We finally arrived at what can fairly be described as a truly stock list. People will always continue testing new ideas and variations, but there's now a base list with a proven track record that the community can rally around. So let's take a look at where Modern Merfolk has settled. Over here on the left, we've got our playset of Benthic Biomancers, and down here on the right, we've got a playset of Deprive. Now, Benthic Biomancer has encouraged us with his instant speed 2-mana adaptability to play more frequently at instant speed on the opponent's turn. The biggest thing this does for us is it keeps information hidden from the opponent for a longer amount of time, making it harder for the opponent to play more accurately. So if we just pass the turn with mana up, they don't know if we want to adapt Ben, or whether we're holding up Trickster, or just holding up a counterspell like Spell Pierce or Deprive. So if it's their turn to try to resolve a big spell, they might be afraid of the open mana and pass through the turn, and if it's on their end step, we can then go ahead and either flash in Trickster or adapt Ben, make him bigger so he can attack for more next turn, or just loot. So this kind of instant speed synergy that Ben has brought to the deck seems to be fueling a lot of this success that we've been experiencing lately. So still have playsets of the two Lords, playset of Trickster, obviously, it's that instant speed synergy with Benthic Biomancer, playset of Silvergill Adepts, playset of Master of Waves. This card is excellent in a format where the #1 card is Lightning Bolt. We've got 2 Harbingers and 2 Spell Pierce. These are the slots that could still be described a little bit as flex slots, though most of the lists that have found success recently have been running the pair of Harbinger of the Tides and 2 Spell Pierce. So this is a couple of cards up here that I personally feel quite strongly about. Harbinger of the Tides can have a very strong impact in certain moments, in certain matchups, but it can also be just a regular 2/2 Merfolk Bear, and that's not the highest impact card. So 2 seems like a great amount for Harbinger. Similarly with Spell Pierce, it's a card that can get outclassed as games go longer and longer. So we don't necessarily want to overload on Spell Pierces, especially since we have the 4 main deck Deprives. So 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Harbinger of the Tides feels just about right. For Spreading Seas, this is something that people have been playing around with a little bit lately. One of the recent 5-0 lists, or maybe even 2 of them, cut a couple of Spreading Seas, moving them to the sideboard in favor of running a couple of Marrow Regeries to increase our threat density. Pilots quickly moved away from that back to 4 Spreading Seas. Running the 4 Spreading Seas in the main deck, it's a pretty core element of our strategy. Establish Island Walk, get a Lord on the table, and attack with unblockable creatures and close out games quickly. If you've only got 2 Spreading Seas, you're going to be able to do that with less consistency. Additionally, Spreading Seas helps us a lot in matchups like Tron, where they need very particular lands in play to affect their strategy. If we can keep them off of those lands with Spreading Seas, we're going to have a much better chance of winning against those decks. Obviously, the 4 Ether Vials, and then looking at the mana base, it's really, really simple. We've got 14 basic islands, which makes us really good against all of the decks running Field of Ruin, because if they keep a hand with a couple of Field of Ruin and no colored mana, or very little colored mana, we can really disrupt their strategy by just playing basic islands. Oboro has excellent synergy with Benthic Biomancer. If we play it early in the game, we can bounce it back to our hand later in the game. If we keep drawing lands and we want something to loot away with Benthic Biomancer, we can pick up Oboro and throw it in the graveyard and hopefully replace it with a better card. Oboro also has really nice synergy with Mutavault, which we're running the full 4 of. If we get stuck with Oboro and Mutavault earlier in the game, we can create blue mana with Oboro, make colorless mana with Mutavault to bounce Oboro back to our hand, and replay it to make more blue mana if we need to cast a Lord, and we don't have that double blue mana. The 4 Mutavaults was something that I shied away from when I first started running Deprive in the main deck, but after testing for a number of weeks, I just found myself wanting the Mutavaults, and it really hasn't prevented me from successfully resolving Deprive, so I'm happy to be back on all 4 Mutavaults. So that's pretty much where the deck has settled. Now, before all these results, before this point, basically, conversations about Modern Merfolk sideboarding have always been pretty vague by necessity, as pilots were running really wildly different lists. How could we accurately discuss sideboarding when our main deck strategies were so different? However, now that there is this stock list, we can suddenly be way more precise in our analysis. Given the particular strengths and weaknesses of this common main deck, we can approach the topic of sideboarding on level ground. So it was with this idea in mind that I decided to undertake a project to assess the relative strengths of all of our sideboard options through a system that assigns weight based on matchup favorability and the metagame percentages of all the various matchups. So to start, I had myself and 2 of the Merfolk pilots who have taken Benthic Biomancer lists to multiple 5-0 results recently, Lepip and Drakanar. We all rated our matchups on a scale from 0 to 5, with 0 being the worst and 5 being the best. I then averaged our 3 scores for an overall matchup favorability rating. So you can see over here on the left were our 3 scores: my score, Pip's score, and Drakanar's score. And then this average column here is where I put them all together to get the average score that I would then move forward with as our favorability rating for that matchup. Now, it's a very important part of the analysis, so I assigned colors to better visualize this aspect. So dark red is for very negative matchups, light red is for slightly negative, light green is for slightly positive, and dark green is for very positive. So, to explain a little bit about that, we've got the 4 artifact matchups here between 4-color Whir and Lantern, and then you have the aggressive strategies with Hardened Scales Affinity and Original Affinity. This other band of red is Jeskai Control, which is pretty unfavorable for us. And then, great matchups are like the Living End matchups where we have a lot of graveyard hate, a lot of counter spells. They just have a hard time getting off the ground against us. So after assigning these colors, I then graded 20 of our best sideboard options in every matchup on a simple scale. I gave 0s if the card is useless in a certain matchup, a 1 if the card is good, or a 2 if the card is great. So discussion and confirmation of these grades were provided by Stoneheart, a Merfolk pilot who had 3 5-0 results published in November of last year. Once our grades were finalized, they then had 2 different multipliers applied to them. The first multiplier is simply the matchup's metagame percentage. For example, Blue-Red Phoenix has an approximate 6% metagame share, so every card in that matchup will have a 6 times multiplier applied to it. This is sensible because sideboard cards that are good in extremely prevalent matchups are far more important than sideboard cards that are good in rare matchups. So the 20 cards that I matched up, that I rated, the 20 cards that I rated, if you see the top here, are Relic of Progenitus, Echoing Truth, Dismember, Chalice of the Void, Hurkyl's Recall, Ceremonious Rejection, Spellskite, Damping Sphere, Mistcaller, Tidebinder Mage, Venser, Shaper Savant, Gutshot, Surgical Extraction, Grafdigger's Cage, Kira, Great Glass Spinner, Kapala, Warden of Waves, Vendilion Click, Hibernation, Sorceress Spyglass, and Damping Matrix. If we look quickly at the matchup column here, I grouped strategies by similarity, even if they had relatively disparate percentages. So Izzet Phoenix is grouped with Mono Red Phoenix for a total of 9% of the metagame, but their individual metagame percentages were what was applied as multipliers. So you can see Izzet Phoenix has 6% of the metagame. So, and it's a light green, so it has a 1 multiplier and a 6 multiplier. Applied across the board, you can see that Relic had received a 2 grade, which is then multiplied by 6. Similarly, Echoing Truth got a 2 against Izzet Phoenix. Dismember got a 1. They have some burn elements in the deck and some evasive flying creatures, so playing too many Dismembers can hit our life total too hard. So Dismember only got a 1, but it still had a 6 multiplier, so it does get 6 points in this matchup. Chalice got a 2 since Izzet Phoenix runs so many 1-drops. Spellskite as protection against their burn spells got a 1. Damping Sphere got a 1. Mistcaller got a 2, preventing Phoenixes from coming in from the graveyard. Tidebinder got a 1 since it can lock up Phoenixes. Venser got a 1 since it can bounce, like a thing in the ice. Interaction is just good in this matchup. Gutshot. Gutshot got a 1. We had a discussion about this, I know, Stoneheart and I, about Gutshot in this matchup. Trying to remember exactly why it got a 1. I'm just going to go past that one for now. If you guys have any questions about any of the particular ratings, feel free to leave a comment down below. We did discuss all of these at length. Surgical Extraction gets a 2 because, it can just pick out those Phoenixes. Grafdigger's Cage also gets a 2. It can stop Faithless Looting. It can stop the Phoenixes. Kira for protection got a 1. Kapala for protection got a 1. And the rest of these cards got 0s. So I went through that process for every single deck, every single sideboard card, applied the multipliers, and then just added up all of the scores down here at the bottom. You can see that Relic received a total of 80.5, Echoing Truth 98.5, etc. I'm not sure I totally explained the multiplier at the top there. It says a 0.5 multiplier is applied for dark green and red matchups. The reason being is that a 0.5 multiplier is going to obviously reduce the number of points that any card gets in that particular matchup. The reason for that is hopefully a reason that you can agree with. It's that if a matchup is really good or really bad, then our sideboarding decisions and the cards that we choose to run aren't going to move those a great deal. For example, against Lantern Control and 4-color Whir, that matchup's not going to become positive, based on our sideboarding decisions. It's always going to be pretty bad. So while going about deciding what cards to include in the sideboard, I didn't want these matchups to have an overly strong effect on the results. So I applied a 0.5 multiplier to reduce their impact. For light green matchups, they're already slightly favorable, so I just applied a simple 1x multiplier, choosing to let just the metagame percentages affect their scores. But for these light red matchups, these are the ones that we really want to shore up with our sideboard because, it's like they're at the point where they're slightly favorable, but we can push them into favorable territory with smart decisions in our sideboarding. So if you glance at the data, you can see the highest individual scores generally show up towards the top of the table because of the metagame percentage multiplier. The highest scores of all appear for Dredge, which has is a slightly negative matchup, and it has a very high metagame percentage. So it's 6% of the metagame, and it has a 1.5 multiplier on top of that. So every score, whether 2 or 1, gets multiplied by 9. You can see a Relic is worth 18 points, Echoing Truth is worth 18 points, etc. So high scores mean we'll want to focus a good deal of attention on this matchup. So finally, I just threw in this purple column over here, which just highlights matchups that use the graveyard as a significant resource. For this analysis, I only looked at the top 33 decks in Modern, which represent approximately the top 77% of the format you can see down here with these numbers. So extrapolating to the entire format, it's reasonable to estimate that roughly half the decks in Modern use the graveyard as a significant resource. So going to next couple of charts here, we can see the total weighted scores of all the 20 sideboard cards looked at in this analysis. So Echoing Truth from 98.5 Relic of Progenitus, also excellent, 80.5, really powerful in a broad number of matchups in the format. All the way down here to things like Hibernation and Hurkyl's Recall, very narrow, with low scores of 11.5. If we defrag the list, it looks like this chart on the right here, color-coded by effect. Blue effects are bounce, purple is anti-graveyard effects, yellow is protection effects, red is kill effects, green is proactive effects, and orange is what I categorized as reactive effects. One of the interesting things I saw when I collated all of this data here is that the top 5 results, the top 5 scoring cards, Echoing Truth, Relic, Kira, Dismember, and Vendilion Clique, are all from different groups. So based on this analysis, one might be tempted to simply play 3 copies of each of these cards to make a 15-card sideboard and call it a day. And honestly, you'd probably do pretty well with such an approach. All the cards do a great job against a huge portion of the metagame. So if you apply these cards in an accurate way, you should win, matches pretty frequently. However, the purpose of this study from the beginning was never to arrive at a set-in-stone optimal list of cards that you must play. The purpose was to bring some semblance of objectivity to our decisions, as sideboarding is so often driven by our gut. It's anecdotal, match-by-match experience that's extremely important for understanding how to play the game. But large-scale metagame trends and data can give us a much broader perspective and, in theory, help us win more matches. So I've developed a few conclusions based on my analysis. First, playing Deprive in the main deck has had an impact on our matchups. Take Titan Shift as an example. It's here in the chart. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Pip gave it a 4, and Drakanar gave it a 3. Titan Shift has always been a miserable matchup for Modern Merfolk, but Deprive has made it solidly favorable for us. And you can see that the 3 of us all agree that it is in favorable territory. All we needed was a catch-all counterspell to stop Primeval Titan and/or Scapeshift. Merfolk's weakest matchups have traditionally been faster aggro decks, namely Affinity, Hardened Scales Affinity, or Old Affinity. While the addition of Deprive and the subsequent trimming of Harbinger of the Tides has slightly further weakened these matchups, it's my belief that Deprive has given us a powerful tool that, combined with Benthic Biomancer, helps us more effectively address most of the metagame. Additionally, having these 4 catch-all counterspells in the main deck has opened up a great deal of real estate in our sideboards. Second, Modern is extremely diverse. Aggro, control, combo, and mid-range strategies are all really well represented. As we move into a new era of Modern Merfolk with Deprive and Benthic Biomancer, we need to carefully reassess our matchups against these strategies and not sit back on old assumptions. Third, approximately half of the format uses the graveyard as a significant resource. Because of this, the importance of having graveyard hate in our sideboard cannot be overstated. Again, you can see this is pretty much exactly a 2-to-1 ratio between decks and graveyard. So about 50% of the format is graveyard oriented. You really need to have answers for those kinds of strategies. Fourth, artifact decks are not dominating the format. Merfolk is extremely weak to artifact strategies, as I've mentioned, whether they be, ensnaring bridge matchups or affinity matchups. All of these decks combined currently make up only about 8% of the metagame, and because of this fact, we should rely solely on general tools to address these decks rather than artifact-specific tools when building our sideboards. Fifth, there's an increased prevalence of red in the format. Lightning Bolt is the most played spell in Modern, and Faithless Looting is actually the second. This fact supports our main deck inclusion of Master of Waves, as well as potentially including Tideminer Mage in the sideboard. Just glancing at the top of the format, is it Phoenix, Mono Red Phoenix, Burn? It's a lot of red up there at the top of the format. So, again, Master of Waves pretty well situated. Sixth, there are several new combo-oriented decks making moves in the format, including Blue-Red Electro Dominance Living End down here. What else do we have? Vanifar Pod, and then Sultai Reclamation/Teachings. Now that one's a little bit more of a combo deck, but the Wilderness Reclamation aspect of it is kind of a combo element. These decks all represent slightly over 1% of the metagame already, and they're only weeks old. So, though they're very young decks, they already occupy a healthy slice of the metagame, and we should keep an eye out for them. We need to refine our plans against them, and we may need to adapt our sideboards to bolster these matchups. 7th, generic bounce effects are extremely useful in a mono blue tempo deck like Merfolk. Echoing Truth easily won the top spot in this sideboard study. Whether we need to bounce a Gurmag Angler, an Ensnaring Bridge, an army of Arclight Phoenixes, or simply saving one or more of our creatures from removal, Echoing Truth is the spell we should look to for its flexible mana cost and powerful effect. 8th, related to the previous point and to point number 4, narrow bounce effects like Hurkyl's Recall and Hibernation are suboptimal choices. These two spells finished last in my analysis. We simply don't have space in our sideboards to accommodate such cards. 9th, Dismember is far superior to Gutshot as a sideboard card. If we look at the result table again, we can see that Dismember more than doubled Gutshot's score. Not only can Dismember deal with way more threats than Gutshot, but we are actively looking for more one-drop effects to use on turn 1 and 3, when we often waste mana. Dismember slots into our strategy smoothly, and addresses a wide segment of the format, whereas Gutshot is far narrower. 10th, protective creatures appear strong against a significant portion of the format. Looking one more time at the chart here, we can see that Kira, Kapala, and Spellskite appear towards the top of the chart. This indicates a massive amount of spot removal in the format. However, it might just be the case that our new main deck counterspells and natural resilience as a deck can carry us through some of the removal-heavy matchups. So, having made these observations, I met again with Drakanar, Pip, and Stoneheart to discuss a unified approach to sideboarding for Merfolk in the current metagame. After a great deal of discussion, this is what we came up with. So off the bat, we've got 4 Relics, 2 Grafdigger's Cages, 2 Echoing Truth, 2 Dismembers, 2 Tidebinder Mages, 2 Wizard's Retorts, and 1 Spell Pierce. We went back and forth with each other for an hour or two, discussing some of the finer points about each of these spells and other options, and ultimately we settled on this setup. The 4 Relic of Progenitus don't really have to be explained, but I will anyway. Relic hits all the graveyard strategies at the top of the chart, and throughout the format, including mid-range strategies like Rock, Jund, Mardu, as well as degenerate combo decks like Dredge, Living End, Grishelbrand. Relic was the number 2 card by impact in this analysis, addressing again roughly 50% of the metagame. And the fact that it draws a card makes it an easy 4 of in the sideboard. Speaking of that 50% of the metagame that uses the graveyard, we felt that 4 Relics was not quite as much coverage as we'd like. For that reason, we've included a pair of Grafdigger's Cages as well. The cage prevents creatures from entering the battlefield from the graveyard against decks like Phoenix and Dredge, and also prevents those Phoenix decks from casting Faithless Looting from the graveyard. However, Grafdigger's Cage also has another ability. It prevents creatures from entering the battlefield from libraries. This hits random difficult matchups like Pod, Devoted Company, and even Elves. It stops Vannifar, Collected Company, and Court of Calling in their tracks. For all this versatility, Grafdigger's Cage earns its 2 spots in our sideboard. Next, Echoing Truth is included as a 2 of because of its immense flexibility. Dismember is also a 2 of, and helps supplement Echoing Truth against creature matchups like Blue-Red Phoenix, Grixis Death Shadow, Spirits, Humans, and mid-range matchups like Rock, Jund, and Mardu. With the increased prevalence of red in the format I mentioned earlier, we all agreed that 2 copies of Tidebinder Mage in the sideboard would be pretty smart. I've personally been having great success with this card recently, as all sorts of decks from Burn to Phoenix to Hollow One to Suicide Zoo to Jund and Rock and others have been popping up in my leagues. So Tidebinder Mage really overachieving lately, and we all agreed that 2 was a good number. The last 2 spells we agreed upon for this unified sideboard approach are 2 Wizard's Retorts and a single extra Spell Pierce. These bring us up to 6 double blue hard counters and 3 Spell Pierces across our main deck and sideboard for a total of 9 counter spells. These extra counter spells help us improve a wide variety of matchups from Burn to Mono Green Tron to Ad Nauseam and many others. So the four of us are going to be testing this sideboard configuration and developing a sideboarding guide in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for more updates on that. For now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave your thoughts and questions down below in the comments section. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And please take a moment to check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support these videos. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.